Hi, my name is Martin Purnell, and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who go or don't go to church and where we can meet and hear from those that have made their faith count. This podcast series is to encourage via conversation. You can contact us as well by email ogc@accessradio.biz, and biz is spelled B-I-Z. So welcome to another of our special episodes with a returning guest from episode 173. Our guest is a published author of several titles, and in episode 173, our guest discussed her latest book, Our Sisters, and how she got involved with the charity Women Without Roofs, Nepal. Our guest is now the chair of trustees for this charity. During our podcast, she discussed, albeit briefly, modern-day slavery. We discussed after the podcast recording how a special podcast might be of benefit to the OGC listener. So, what does global slavery look like today? Why do big sporting events see an increase in trafficking? Will the current World Cup in USA, Mexico and Canada be any different? What exactly is trafficking? What is the difference between slavery, human trafficking and human smuggling? What can she share about global slavery, especially as a trustee at Women Without Roofs, Nepal? It gives me great pleasure to welcome back Anna Townsend. Anna, thank you so much for this. I have no understanding as to where we're going to end up on this podcast, other than it's a subject you know a lot about, and being a member of not just one but two different charities that obviously would encompass today's title of What Does Global Slavery Look Like? So for those that first of all know nothing about you, who is Anna Townsend, please?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, well, you've done a great introduction already. I think the bit maybe there that people wouldn't know is that I'm a military wife. So I'm involved in charities in Nepal, two charities in Nepal, because I was posted there with my husband who served with the Gurkhas. So we were first there from 2004 to 2006, and then more recently from 2020 to 2022, living in Nepal. But I've also, through Army life, lived in America. So I've done that twice as well. And whilst in Virginia, served on the board of Virginia Beach Justice Initiative, which is an anti-human trafficking charity in America. And then in the UK as well, in my various postings, we've probably spent half our time. We've lived in 20 houses, so about 10 of those houses have been in the UK and have been involved in various anti-trafficking groups in the UK too. So I kind of feel like I've sort of dabbled and got to know a little bit about trafficking in all these different locations. I'm not proclaiming that I'm an expert as well, but I know experts and I've asked them for their help with this. So I've got some things to share and I've got some stories of my own to share.
So first question then, if that's okay, and it's the title of today's podcast. What does global slavery look like today, Anna?
Global slavery today looks like a multi-billion pound business that operates across the world, that works across borders. It covers things like sex trafficking for labor purposes as well. And it's basically a boom industry fueled by the internet. As our technology and communication has improved, then so sadly our demand for trafficking victims. Yeah, it's a huge money-making venture.
You'd think that in 2026, though, we'd have the powers and everything else to say, hey, we can stop this. So why are people getting away with it, and why are there so many victims still, do you think?
Yeah, because as the technology is improving on how we catch people, it's also improving on how they can be covert. The dark web allows money to move. It allows communication to go unnoticed. And it allows people to make connections, powerful connections, and access money that allows them to get away with things, pay bribes. There's certainly plenty that goes on, and bribes are paid to cover things up in certain parts of the world. Yeah, it's moving in tandem, if you like. As we're getting better at detecting it, it's getting better at hiding.
Talk about that later on, no doubt, and how somebody's trafficked, how somebody is caught. You can share all from your knowledge, especially when you were living abroad as well, what you saw. We are in the middle of a certain football thing at the moment. I believe it's called the World Cup, he says, in brackets, knowingly. I just said at the very beginning, why do we see certain sporting events, such as the World Cup, for instance, mean that we see an increase in trafficking?
Well, at the end of the day, although it is about sport, it's ultimately about entertainment, the World Cup. And when there's a group of people gathered for entertainment, they want other forms of entertainment as well. And that might be going to bars and drinking, and therefore you need cheap labour to man those bars. You need a sudden short-term influx of labour. So folks are trafficked for labour and working in those bars and working in those clubs. But then you also get the prostitution as well as Particularly football is a group of men generally watching it and traveling to watch it. When they're away from home, they may want entertainment in the evening, and therefore they're paying for victims of trafficking. So, yeah, sadly, it means as well as people travel between these different venues, it's easier to cover up the movement of people for this as well.
And of course, there was on social media, so I suppose awash with information at the last World Cup, where suggestions were made there's a lot of human trafficking going on for the building of stadiums. How true was that?
Yeah, so that actually is crossing a little bit into smuggling. So this is where we get the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling. So smuggling is where the victim has wanted to get that job and they've wanted to move countries. So for instance, if they're paying a truck owner to hide in the back of the truck and then get driven across the border, that's smuggling. And that person in that case is willing and wanting to move to that other country.
Right.
Trafficking is when there's duplicity and they're being tricked. So they're being promised a job and then they're being moved to that job and then that job doesn't exist and they're instead employed in prostitution or some kind of forced labor. In the World Cup, the workers who were there were Nepalis there, plenty of Nepalis and Indians and Pakistanis working on building the World Cup in Qatar. But they actually were there willingly. So they'd wanted those jobs in Qatar. But then when they arrived there, the conditions weren't as good as they'd hoped. But they did agree and go willingly somewhat. That doesn't mean that they should therefore then be treated badly, but it means that they were there willingly.
Thank you for pointing that out, because obviously social media would say otherwise in certain areas. It's good to make a clear point here that there's a big difference in trafficking and, as you said, being smuggled over.
Exactly. They were there because they wanted jobs and there weren't jobs in Nepal and these other countries for them.
Let's talk more about trafficking then. Tell us more. What happens, please?
Yeah, well, I can tell a story from Nepal. It's in my book, Come With Me to Kathmandu. Women Without Roofs helps women that have been abandoned and are on their own. And for about 10, 12 years, we've helped this one woman called Suki. That's actually an alias, but that's what I call her in the book if somebody wants to go and read all the details. So Suki grew up in an area called Sindhupalchok. When she was 5 months old, she rolled into the fire in the middle of her house. It was just a hut. Her mother was out at the time collecting water. So she was on her own, even though she's only 5 months old. Ended up in the fire. Her mother came in, saw her there in the fire and thankfully had water with her to throw on the fire. It would have been a lot worse if she hadn't. She probably would have lost her life. Suki then grew up as a child with her chin stuck to her chest. So as she ate food as a child, she would kind of dribble the food out. And the prevailing belief in Nepal is in karma, which says you get what you deserve. So she was then seen as an unlucky child. So she was ostracized by most of the village, by the rest of her family. And at mealtimes in particular, it was made to sit in the corner out of sight because she was making a mess and people didn't want to be with her. So she then, as she grew older and she didn't like this, there's nothing wrong with her mentally and her brain was there. She decided to take herself off to Kathmandu, which is about a 3-hour walk from where she lived, and visit a mission hospital there where she could get some treatment. And so they successfully managed to separate her chin from her chest. And so she could then look up and walk around, and she returned to her village. But her family weren't really willing to take her back in. So they married her off at about the age of 11 or 12, married her off to a man who, of course, didn't treat her well. She had 4 children with him, but she was still treated as this unlucky, bad karma type of woman. And all of his family were very nasty to her. So with her 4 children, she eventually decided again to head back to Kathmandu. So she came all the way on the buses with 4 children, I think under the age of 7 or 8 at this time. So you can imagine how hard that was. Ended up in Kathmandu with a friend and then decided from that point forward, really, she would look after herself. So she has never gone back to the village since then. She had to get work as a labourer. She just took whatever job she could find. And her 4 children, she would leave them locked up in the room, the single room that she had while she went out to work. So really desperate times for her. After a few years, things got worse on her neck. So I think because she'd had this scar tissue, she developed a kind of tumour in her neck that then became larger and more visible. So she went to the hospital, was able to get an operation, but she would be in hospital for 6 weeks. This is crazy to me. I can't imagine how anyone would even think of this. So her 4 children, she had no one to look after them. She took her 4 children to a street gang of other children and left her 4 children with the street gang, because she knew that although street children roam the streets in the day, they always come back to the same place at night to sleep. So she knew she would find them again. So she went into hospital, it was a mission hospital, and graciously, by God, she heard the gospel in the hospital. A lady called Jean, who I've never met, who was from the UK, shared the gospel with her, and she became a Christian. She came out of hospital, retrieved her children, and then carried on life as it was, doing this labour. Having joined a church, she managed to make a few contacts and got some help with childcare. And when her daughter is the eldest, and then she had 3 boys. So when her daughter was about 13, a man from the church came to babysit for them. And very tragically, he began to molest her daughter. So Suki didn't know what to do. But in this culture, once a girl is kind of, lost her purity, if you like, even though it's not her fault, of course, the solution is always to marry them off. So it was suggested to Suki that she married her daughter at 13 to this man, who was supposedly a Christian, but clearly not. That took place. Her daughter got married. This man wanted to impress his boss at work. So he offered his new wife, his 13-year-old wife, to his boss to try and get a promotion. I'm not sure that actually took place, actually. I don't have that for definite. But word obviously got out that there was this 13-year-old who was being offered and was available, and that obviously the husband wasn't very good. So another man offered money for this girl and offered to buy her, basically, and promised to do something with her. I don't think the man cared, and Suki was not really in contact. Once her daughter was married off to this man, the husband, she wasn't really in contact. She didn't know what was happening to her daughter. So the husband accepted. He took some money. The other man came along. He gave some drugs to Suki's daughter, knocked her out, and while she was unconscious, he smuggled her over the border to Delhi, where she became a prostitute for the next 10 years, having been bought. Amazingly, Suki was a Christian by this point. So Suki prayed every night. She shared this with me. I've spoken to her, and she just described how she would wake in the night and cry. When no one else was awake, she would pour out her heart to God, and God heard her prayers. I mean, this is such a tragic story, but her daughter, after 10 years of being in Delhi, was able to escape. And sometimes this happens because they start to get regular customers as they get older, and these customers think that they're in love with the girls, so they'll do something to help. So I'm not quite sure what happened in Suki's daughter's case, but she managed to get out, and then she worked as a labourer to pay for her transport back to Kathmandu. So when I was visiting in 2012, I was with Suki, and prior to this, we were already helping her, but we had no idea that she had a daughter. We knew she had 3 sons, but we had no idea that she had a daughter. This girl turned up just the week before my visit. It was absolutely astonishing. She went to the old address where her mum used to live and was told that her mum was no longer there, and then came to find her mum in the new house, and was there, though, in hiding because she'd spent 10 years. She was in her mid-20s by this point, and she'd spent 10 years in Delhi. She had been applying a lot of makeup while she was in Delhi. They were obliged to. Her face was quite stained with all the sort of black coal, if you like, they put around the eyes. So her eyes were very dark and she looked different. So all of the neighbours were gossip, because it was kind of obvious just from her appearance and her new accent, because she'd picked up an Indian accent rather than a Nepali accent, that this girl had been working in a brothel. So poor Suki and her daughter were just hiding in this room, and I got to visit within a week of her turning up. But life is better now. This was obviously back in 2012, so her daughter has found work. She still has some mental scars, like kind of PTSD, and was hit over the head while she was in the brothels. But she described being hidden behind cupboards when the police would come to raid. The brothels were completely set up to continue what they were doing and paying off the police and hiding from the police. But Suki's story, I think, particularly the area that she comes from, and this idea of relatives and husbands selling their wives and sisters and nieces and so forth, is sadly very commonplace in that particular area that Suki comes from. It's become a sort of way of life, if you like. So that's just one story, but it's sadly very typical for that area.
How typical are we talking about?
Estimates vary. The sort of low estimates for Nepal are about 6,000 women a year trafficked into India, but the high estimates are something like 25,000. There's quite a lot of work done at the border to stop girls if they see a girl traveling with a man, and if the girl looks a bit, I don't know, sheepish and a bit covered up, then they'll approach her. But the traffickers are good at sort of prepping them to cross the border, if you like. In Suki's daughter's case, she was hidden. She was in the back of a car. She was unconscious, and they just covered her up with coats, I think, as they went through the border. And they don't look that closely, if you like, the border guards. They're not going through cars looking for women.
You see, you'd like to think that if Suki's daughter ended up in Britain and the police found her, there'd be a massive operation to try and close down everything, with Suki's daughter sharing all. What are the chances of that happening in Nepal? For sharing all, so that the whole thing can be closed down?
It's complicated. And this is where the other organisation that I'm involved with, First Light South Asia, is doing research. So basically, if a girl is trafficked to India to work in a brothel, she goes through various stages. So at the beginning, when she's often still a teenager and essentially a child, she is kept under lock and key and is beaten and raped and gradually kind of worn down. After 4 to 5 years of this, she can no longer almost imagine herself back at home, and those links are broken, and she feels resigned to this. And actually, at this point, the women start to have a lot of freedom. And this is what surprised me when I was working with my friend who's doing this research, is women in their 20s who were trafficked years earlier go backwards and forwards. They take money back to Nepal to their families, but because their families are relying on that money, they go back. They take themselves back to the brothels because they feel they've got no other choice. Their family needs that money. They have no skills to go out to work. They have friends essentially in the brothel. For there, they know how the system works in the brothel. And then once they hit the age of 30, they either kind of go into, well, often they've had illnesses, sexually transmitted diseases, and their life expectancy is short, or they become the brothel madams and start running this again. It's really pioneering, this research, is looking at what can be done to get these women out. So what you're describing, the raid and rescue, does work for the children, if you like, the young teenagers. If you can get them out fairly soon after being trafficked from that brothel, then yes, it works. But the older women, the 20-year-olds, if they go through that raid and rescue experience, it often traumatizes them further. They become scared and fearful, and they realize it's happening. The madams kind of know the police have warned them, and so they take it out on the girls, telling them to hide. So the raids just don't work. And then furthermore, once they get back to Nepal, the approach in the past has been almost to re-institutionalize these women. So their phones are taken from them. They're kept in a kind of prison so that the traffickers can't get them to them anymore. But it just further exacerbates their lack of independence. Yeah, it's like another sort of kidnapping, if you like, these raid and rescues. And it's happening more and more, is this whole kind of getting the women who've gone through this to inform the research about what actually works. And most of them, what they want to be able to do is know their options. So whilst they're still in the brothels in Delhi, is be told about their options. What can they come back and do? Is there housing available if they come back? Will I get trained in some skills if I come back to Nepal? How can these organizations support me? And then they, through, my friend calls it self-rescue, take themselves back to Nepal. They manage to link up with these organizations. And then because they're deciding to do it for themselves, it's much, much more successful than the sort of raid and rescue. But it sounds counterintuitive, I know.
Yeah. Tell us more on that, why it is proving to be successful.
I think there basically comes a tipping point when these women are in their 20s. They look to the future and they think, right, either I'm going to end up living here all my life, I'm not going to get out of this brothel, or I've got to make a positive decision and choose another option. And so First Light South Asia is putting support services, it's like a holistic package that they can come back to in Nepal. And they don't have to utilize all of it. So that we're teaching life skills, we're providing some housing if they want it, we're doing literacy lessons, helping with employment, and then providing healthcare if they need it, and mental health care. And it might be as well that they need it at different times. So the woman who first arrives back in Nepal might not feel ready to talk about her trauma, but 6 months later, a year later, she's ready to have some counselling and wants to start processing it. The other crucial element is that if you come back and there's other women who've been through the same experiences, they support each other. So rather than having this sort of institutionalized prison, if you can have a drop-in centre where women who've been through this have come back to Nepal, they can call in and chat to other women and then take themselves off again if there's too much pressure, if you like. Yes, too much pressure to kind of change their lives. They can head back again and have a bit of time out, and it's so much more successful. And this is all research that's kind of ongoing. There's conclusions, certainly, but there's more to discover and learn, really, about this voluntary repatriation is the kind of formal term for it. So it's voluntary. The women are choosing and they're being repatriated to their countries.
So the conclusion so far from your research is what?
The conclusion is that there needs to be different approaches to getting the women out of the brothels. Raid and rescue is positive for some when they're young, and it's positive for those who don't feel that they've got the capacity or the strength to get themselves out. But for the majority of women, it's much better if they voluntarily repatriate, if they take themselves back when they've got the money, when they feel in the mental headspace ready to take on that challenge, because it's a huge challenge coming back to your country of birth, where people will abuse you, if you see what I mean. You know, it's where you were vulnerable and trafficked from. So although there's a huge abuse going on in India, you're still going back to that country and to your family, which may have been the ones to sell you. So you've got to be ready for it, I guess.
Of course, we're listening to this, when majority of people listening to this around the world are living in kind of call it a Western society, where we've been brought up to think that we're fairly safe. We have certain rules, certainly here in the UK. We often hear of stories where the police have successfully broken a gang and they've been able to release the girls, the ladies, or just a single person, and the gang are then held accountable. And we know recently, they've been sent away to prison for like 20 years. And we're talking about not just one person, but, a whole gang, 10 people or more, for instance. We're looking at the situation that's going on in Nepal and India and Pakistan with this mindset. But I suppose what we also have to take in consideration here, Anna, is that there's a different culture. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying anything like that. But there's a different culture and a different mindset in those countries. So how do you cope with that?
Oh, gosh, it's very hard to cope with that. Yeah, I mean, we in this country, we have support services. So if a victim comes out, then she is supported. And it's not always perfect, but there is counselling available. There's healthcare, obviously.
Yeah.
There are colleges that exist where she can go and get some training. In Nepal, this dynamic of family members trafficking their own nieces, daughters, and that being a means of income for a whole community makes it very, very different. And certainly there's work going on to help those communities, have different means of income. But Nepal is a very impoverished country with a lot of land. You can't farm it because it's very steep. It's a landlocked country, so that makes it poorer to begin with. So all of these factors, it's so complicated, if you like. When you're talking about getting a community to stop relying on trafficking and instead to have another means of employment, then that just takes a lot of resources. But it's being done. People are investing in that. I mean, tourism for Nepal is a huge income. That particular area that I'm talking about, Sindhupal Chowk, is not particularly on the tourist trail, but it could be, with some good advertising and building some good hotels and making sure that they are employing people to high standards, then that area could be turned around. But all of these things take time.
Yeah. So what about India? I take it as they sort of border Nepal, and this is where they seem to be smuggled in. What are they doing themselves to say, hey, no, we take responsibility as well, and we need to do something about closing down these brothels and other forms of trafficking that gets people there?
Yeah, well, India's a really mixed bag. I mean, obviously, because it is a country of over 1 billion people, there's a range of views.
Yeah.
I feel like people are just called to go to India, really, because historically, India has had all sorts of practices that that don't value women. So there's something called Devadesi, which is where women were given to the temple as prostitutes. This was particularly happening in South India. And if anyone's heard of the missionary Amy Carmichael, who was around in the 1880s, that's what she did. She went to the south of India and set up children's homes and would rescue children out of the temples. Yeah, and provide them. She set up a huge number of orphanages. But generally, and this again is a sweeping statement because India is so big, but traditionally India has had the practice of arranged marriages. And it has been acceptable for families to arrange the marriage, nothing to do with kind of sexual attraction or any intimacy in that. It's much more of a business transaction. If one family makes doors and another family makes windows, then the two families arrange a marriage between them, and then suddenly they become a window and door manufacturer. That it's just a business transaction. And so it's been acceptable for the man, the husband in particular, to find or go out and have sex with prostitutes because it's not seen that that is part of the marriage, particularly. I mean, they have sex to have children, but beyond that, it's not seen as part of the marriage. So the Christian ideal of a marriage unit being kind of a sacred unit and for intimacy and to be faithful to one another, if we're a Christian, that has become the predominant ideal in our Western world because we're Christian. And actually, India needs to hear that. We need missionaries to go back and to go into places like India and say, actually, you don't need to be going and seeing prostitutes because it's so endemic within their society. There's police stations that have a prostitute in there because the policemen are using them.
What? Really?
Yeah, that's not rare at all. I mean, it's just seen as part of their culture because they have this caste system that sees people at different levels. They're just, there's certain levels of their society that they see as being suitable for prostitution. So I don't want to upset any Indian person listening to this because it sounds very sweeping, and I know it's not entirely like that. But I suppose the point I'm making that a man and a wife should be faithful and sexual intimacy is a gift from God within that marriage is not the predominant or wasn't in the past the predominant sort of model for how marriages work in India. So yeah, if somebody's listening to this and feels like, they want to pray for men in India, then I would really encourage them because there's so many organizations who are focused on the victims of trafficking and sexual exploitation, but really we need to address the root cause, which is the men who are providing the demand for all of this.
That was my next question, actually, because over here, it's still looked down upon, really. I know some people make light of it. Oh, well, I was on holiday and I just fancied going to see a girl, so I paid money, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But generally, I would think in the Western society that we live in, it's not looked upon favourably.
Yeah, I agree.
But in Nepal, if you're a bloke...
Well, it's India. India's the demand. It's India rather than Nepal. There's some internal trafficking within Nepal, but most of it is from Nepal to India.
So in the Indian culture, if you are arrested for going to a brothel, I don't know if that's a law over there, I don't know. Maybe you are allowed to go to brothels without having to worry about the consequences. What are they thinking over there in India now about the fact, I went to a prostitute and everything's fine? And what happens when they do get arrested for using a prostitute? What happens?
Well, sadly, I think they can pay bribes to get off with any prosecution. Things are definitely changing. In the big cities in India, there's a huge sort of women's rights movement. It links into other issues because there's been these sort of gang rapes in India and well-known cases. And so women, and they're supported by men, particularly like young students, are rallying on the streets and standing up for women's rights. So there's definitely a change in all of that, but it's by no means complete. And I can't be general with India. India's sort of too big, if you like, to talk in general terms, but there's definitely a movement towards more women's rights. But then I think like the UK and the West, we've got this whole sort of manosphere coming along and men speaking about women. You have the president who's quite derogatory and has made comments about women. So it's a battle, I guess, we're all in, isn't it? Against sin and against evil in this world. But yeah, certainly historically, India has had a very different paradigm for how it's viewed sex and marriage.
So is it fair to say the number one reason then why Nepalese girls are smuggled out is because they, being the smugglers, know where their market is and know that they can offer money and the Nepalese families will accept it.
Some Nepalese families, I wouldn't say all of them, but they know that Nepal as a poor country is not well organised and it can't come in and rescue its girls. And I think Nepal, generally, their politicians would want to do something against this. I don't think anyone's in favour of it, but they just know that there's a weakness there that they can exploit. Indians in general view Nepalis as a bit lower down. There's just a general sort of feeling of that.
How many of these girls are smuggled out of India and Pakistan to the wider world? What do you know?
I don't know that there's many coming out of India. I think the demand is mainly in India, possibly to places like Thailand, but anywhere that has poor rural communities, they don't really need girls to come in from outside, if you like. Yeah, so this isn't in Pakistan. You did say Pakistan there. Pakistan is quite different for their view on all of this because they have an Islamic view of marriage is actually quite protective of women. So there's much less trafficking of women in Pakistan. The trafficking that takes place and the slavery that takes place in Pakistan is more bonded labour and viewing Christians as lower in the blasphemy laws. Yeah, not so much sexual trafficking.
So that'd be more of human trafficking then and human smuggling. Yeah, share a bit more on that, please.
Yeah, so I've done my second book, Our Sisters, is about girls in Pakistan. And in that, I had to look at the blasphemy laws, which are incredibly tight, if you like. So if I was to knock over my phone that we're recording this on and said, Jesus Christ, because I'd knocked it over and was sort of cross with myself, that prick of irritation that any sort of Christian listening to this would feel is blasphemy, because I've just sort of spoken some blasphemous words. So in Pakistan, if I was to speak against Islam like that, and say something derogatory about Islam, then the punishments for blasphemy are up to 10 years in prison. There's the death sentence for certain blasphemous crimes. And that's if I get to court. If I'm a man, particularly caught in blasphemy, or not even necessarily caught, just accused of blasphemy, a mob can gather and somebody can be stoned. And when I was writing Our Sisters, I accidentally clicked on a link and saw pictures of a man who'd been stoned to death. He was accused of blasphemy. I think he had some pages of the Quran, but they'd been planted on him, like they were in his fire. He was accused of setting light to the Quran, which I don't think was true at all. It was, somebody put the pages there, but he'd been stoned to death. And I'd never obviously seen images like that before. But those blasphemy laws really put Christians in a very weak position within Pakistani society. And again, it's not all Pakistanis, but any Muslim in Pakistani society who takes offense and wants something from a Christian can manipulate them by threat of these blasphemy laws. So, you've got a nice set of headphones there, Martin. If I wanted your headphones and we were in the same place, I could accuse you in public of blasphemy and then take those headphones off you, and it works the same for land. And sadly, it also works the same for your daughter. If you had a daughter that I liked the look of and wanted her for myself, then I could accuse you of blasphemy. And there's not much you could do. It's just my word against yours. And if I'm a Muslim, I'm believed rather than you as a Christian. And I could get what I want and take your daughter from you. So that's how it works, to a much lesser degree than the organised trafficking out of Nepal. But this is how the girls are exploited, Christian girls in Pakistan. And that's more the focus of my book, Our Sisters. The Christian community in general in Pakistan, because it has this low status, is exploited into the brick kilns. So there are brick kilns in Pakistan and they rely on bonded labour. So if a Christian needs some money, particularly they're not given good job opportunities, they often end up in the brick kilns and having to take out loans from the brick kiln owner and then working to pay off that loan. And again, if they don't do a good job, then they risk being accused of blasphemy and they can't really stand up to this brick kiln owner. So he can exploit them with all sorts of bad working practices, or basically providing no safety equipment. They're just working with their hands, these poor labourers. I've been able to visit some of these brick kilns, and it is possible to free these families. If somebody listening to this, it costs about £3,000 generally to free a family. typically they owe about 1,500 to the brick kiln owner, and then they need a means of income afterwards. So I've been involved in rescuing 2 families, and in both those cases we bought them autoed, like a flatbed rickshaw, so that they can make deliveries and take things around afterwards. But it is possible. And in India, particularly if you're trying to get someone out of slavery, it's considered bad practice to pay the sort of brothel owner or the brick kiln owner there, because it just exacerbates it, and they can then lend money to somebody else and bring them into slavery. But in Pakistan, the networks of brick kiln owners are so strong, and Christians, because of this blasphemy law, are in such a weak position. It's generally, again, considered that it's necessary to pay off the brick kiln owner so he doesn't pursue the family afterwards. You need to pay for that piece from him, and then you're able to take the family out of slavery, and usually take them somewhere else, in another city, so they're left alone and can restart their lives. But it is possible.
Okay. Sharp intake of breath here, I think. It's many people most probably thinking, well, I've never really heard about this before. So first of all then, the bond system. Tell me more how that works, please, what that entails.
Yeah, so a family, a friend helped rescue. Their daughter was taken by a man. They then tried to get her back, and they went to the police. The police wouldn't listen. This is often the case, that the police don't listen to Christians. So they ended up having to pay some bribes and get some other people interested in the case to try and get their daughter back. All of that failed. They still didn't get their daughter back. No one took it seriously, but they were then lost money. Their nearby neighbours didn't want to be involved with them, because once a family has kind of lost a daughter, if you like, and had problems with the police, you don't want to be associated with them, because it just brings your life into danger, really, if you're associated with them. So this poor family, having lost their daughter, they needed money. So they then took out a loan from the brick kiln owner and started working for him, and moved location because no one wanted them where they were anyway. So they start paying off this loan, but because the money that they earn from working in the brick kiln is only barely enough to make ends meet. It's just they get a little bit to eat. But if there's any extra cost, like a medical emergency or even just buying new clothes, they have to take out another loan from the brick kiln owner. They're just totally indebted to him, and it just goes round and round in circles. When I was in Pakistan last year, I met a man who was the 3rd generation in the brick kilns. His grandparents had taken this loan. They'd worked all their lives to pay it off. His parents had worked all of their lives to pay it off. And now he was trying to pay off the same loan that had been added to, and he had a baby. So it's likely that this child will be working to pay off this loan. It just, it's generational. This family that I was talking about before, whose daughter had gone, they, were so malnourished. The photos I've had of them, they're small, they're dressed in rags almost, and working in these brick kilns. And the brick kilns, it's hot in Pakistan, so they're often up at 5 a.m. as soon as it gets a little bit light, making bricks with their hands. They have wooden wheelbarrows that they're moving the mud, and then wooden kind of paths that they're putting the mud into. And they start working like that as soon as they learn to walk. 1-year-olds were there patting the bricks down. It's horrific. I sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating. It was awful. And I've been working in Nepal for 20 years, and I'm somewhat, sadly, used to poverty and seeing it. And I've been in all sorts of houses and huts and seen women dressed in rags, but it was another level of exploitation in Pakistan in these brick kilns. Just to see toddlers working, at the break of day and are there every day, and knowing that their parents and grandparents have been stuck in those brick kilns.
Without a weekend break as well, I would have thought, 7 days a week.
Yeah, I think they get Friday afternoons off, because the brick kiln owners are good Muslims. They would have some time on Fridays off. And so my fantastic pastor friend in Lahore, he's so wonderful. If somebody's listening to this and wants to help someone in Pakistan, he's the guy to go through. He was a strong Christian, but running a sort of middle class regular church in Lahore, and doing fine for himself, I think. But God called him into the brick kilns. So now he takes the gospel into the brick kilns. And they're Christians in the brick kilns. They're there really because they're at the lowest part of society, but they actually don't know the gospel. So they're persecuted for being Christians. But because they're illiterate and no one has taken the gospel to them, they actually don't have any of the comfort of knowing God, and none of the hope that comes from being a Christian. They're just persecuted for having the label. So he's going into about 3 or 4 different brick kiln communities. He's the one that I've worked through to rescue a couple of families. I'd love to do more, but it's not cheap, but it's also not that expensive. It's a whole family you can rescue for about 3,000. So it's not beyond the means of some of us. And he's bought some land for a church building. He's opened a school there because none of them were getting any education. So I had such a privilege of going into the school and praying with some of the girls there and about their problems. And yeah, most of them, in a sense, wanted good marriages. They wanted men that would be kind to them when they got married.
What's Lahore like as a city?
Oh, it's really beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I've lived in Kathmandu, which is so much more polluted. Because Kathmandu gets big earthquakes, you actually haven't got a lot of old buildings. It's a lot of concrete buildings.
Mm-hmm.
But Lahore has Mughal architecture, and it's just stunning. There's a fort there, and there's not many tourists at all because Pakistan's not on most people's tourist list. It's stunning. And there's much more commercial activity there, like there are McDonald's and Burger King, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but there's not in Kathmandu. So it seemed quite developed when I went into Lahore.
It's just that with attitudes changing in Nepal, what are the attitudes like in Lahore about these brick kiln workers and the persecution of Christians in particular and the lifestyle that they are leading?
I mean, I don't know all that many Muslims in Pakistan. I only know Christians. The attitude is, in some sense, that this has always happened. So, I mean, I know when you and I were messaging before this, I said it's old-fashioned slavery in Pakistan. It's not modern slavery, it's old-fashioned slavery. And I think the Christian community being so vulnerable to these spurious blasphemy allegations has to keep its head down. And I find my friend is an exception going into the brick kilns, but most of the Christians there, and I don't judge them for this. I mean, we're exactly the same in the West, and I have no idea how I would react living there. But they just don't want to rock the boat because they are so vulnerable. And there's some who are standing up, but even then they have to be careful about what they say. And yeah, it takes brave people. I mean, I do know one. I write about a man called Joseph in my book. His sister was actually in prison for blasphemy, and she managed to get resettled back to Europe. In my book, I write that she's in Germany, but I've had to change a few locations. So there are people who are standing up, and he is an absolute kind of firebrand. Well, I first met him in the European Parliament buildings. He was berating in a very angry way European parliamentarians for having trade relations with Pakistan whilst this was all going on, while girls were being abducted and the brick kilns continued. And blasphemy rules existed, which I think most people would agree are against sort of basic human rights, these blasphemy rules. But he's brave and he's an exception. And as he's doing this, he's also doing rescue missions into Pakistan and going into the brick kilns. In fact, I write about it in the book, and it really pushed my theology of what we should be doing. I don't think I can go into all the details quite now, so I'd encourage you to read the book. But he went in with guns into a brick kiln to rescue this girl. So the girl I talked about, whose family ended up working in the brick kiln, she escaped back to her family because the man that took her completely mutilated her. He actually cut off her nose.
What?
He'd cut her hair off, he cut her nose off, and he took a razor to her private parts as well and cut them. So she escaped back to her family. And then Joseph, this very brave activist I was telling you about, he went in with guns and protection to get her out of that brick kiln. And prior to this, I wouldn't be in favour of guns. No way. And I've already said I'm not sure about raid and rescue, and I've explained that. But God prepared me in a totally miraculous way to read this story. And through kind of my quiet times, I spent 2 days wrestling with this passage, and God wouldn't let me forget about it. It's 1 Samuel 11, where Saul rescues a whole city who are under threat of being maimed. And he's violent, Saul, in this. King Saul in the Old Testament. And I just wrestled with it for a couple of days. And on the second day, immediately after my quiet time, I went from it, having kind of come to my peace that actually God was in this, went to see these photos of Joseph's rescue mission where he's going in with guns. And it just matched so perfectly. It was so clear that God was saying to me, actually, in this case, it was right for Joseph to go in with guns. He didn't have to use them, but he was armed and prepared, and they had a proper rescue mission planned with getaway cars and safe houses and vehicle swaps. so that they wouldn't be pursued by the brick kiln owner and the man that had taken this girl. That pushed my theology, I would say, definitely.
And of course, your husband being in the military as well, there will be times when he would have to use a gun.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would say defence as well, similar to Joseph, prepared to use it in defence, for the right cause. But yeah, obviously lots of books written about just war and military sort of ethics, aren't there?
Cutting off her nose, what was that about?
He was just angry with her. He lost his temper. She was taken when she was about 15, and she actually has, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 children with this man. And he just got angry and chopped her hair off and chopped off her nose. And it wasn't female genital mutilation. He took a razor to hurt her down below and then locked her up in a room because it was so obvious what he'd done to her. He was then, I guess, ashamed. I don't know how he felt of what he'd done, and it was obvious to him, and he locked her up. So then somehow she managed to get to her parents maybe a month or 2 later, and then Joseph heard about this. The man who took her, she actually had to leave her children behind when she was rescued. But the children had been poisoned against her. They called her all sorts of names because they'd grown up in this household where the man had taken her and he lived with his parents. And he abused the mum, the girl he'd taken, constantly. The children had picked up on that and abused her too and called her all sorts of names. But we need a miracle in that case. I mean, other than for God, I don't know how that situation approves. She is safe. I know she's safe with the woman who was taken with her parents and her brother. They're safe now. But yeah, I need a miracle.
With plastic surgery, has she been able to get a nose of sorts?
I don't think there's any money for that. No, it's still there. I mean, it's healed now, but it's missing.
And the bloke himself, I take it he's just got away with stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's move on then, if that's okay, to global slavery.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, you are a chair of the trustees of Women Without Roofs -Nepal. We have to have the -Nepal, or WWR-Nepal will get you onto the website for that. Global slavery then, what does that mean currently?
Well, global slavery is the condition that you're in once you've been trafficked and tricked. And the numbers are only sadly increasing. And our technology, as it improves, is allowing more bad actors to have more influence and enslave more women. Sometimes I'm tempted to think, though, about AI, whether AI is a good thing, because if AI can generate more pornography, it means we don't need more real women in pornography. But I mean, I don't really mean that, because it would be good if we didn't have pornography. But the demand for children to appear in pornography, it would be better if we could just generate it with AI. It'd be better if we just didn't generate it at all. Yeah, sadly, it's growing and growing. So there's also trafficking for labour, as I mentioned, and then things like smuggling drugs. There's a growing kind of use of people to manufacture the drugs. So big cannabis farms rely on trafficking victims often, and then using people to move things about. The people with power never put themselves in danger. So if people actually moving drugs around, driving it, who may get caught, are often people much further down the chain, and they've often been forced into those roles.
Bringing it nearer home, I know it's only a film with Liam Neeson. The film's called Taken. And that is, well, I think one of the most harrowing films I've seen in a long while, even though it's made supposedly for entertainment. And Liam does what Liam does best, with a deep, dark, gravelly voice, going to sort things out, not with his voice, but with action, to retrieve basically his daughter that has been kidnapped and drugged and is being used in the Western society. So how relevant are we in today's society with regard to smuggling into, let's say, the UK?
Yeah, it still happens, particularly from Eastern Europe. I mean, anywhere where there's a differential in income means that there are poorer people who are desperate for jobs in a richer place. So they're then vulnerable to being tricked into accepting a job or something which doesn't turn out to be as expected. The problem with films like Taken, and I haven't seen it, I've just seen snippets and heard other people talk about it, is that it sort of glamorizes this idea of the rescue and going after, the hero, if you like. And it's the same with the film Pretty Woman. It's sort of glamorizing prostitution. So we need to be a lot more responsible in how we dress these things up in Hollywood films, because we are dangerously making it look like there can be heroes and it's all glamorous. And it really isn't like that. Particularly in America, in the UK, if it's girls from our own country who are being trafficked into sex exploitation, they're often being hooked onto drugs at the same time, because it's much harder in our countries to imprison vast numbers of women. So you have to control and manipulate them through some other means. And that can mean drugs. In America, where there's much more guns, it can mean controlling them by violence and threat of violence against their families, rather than actual imprisonment. Imprisonment is what you can get away with in Asia, because the countries are huge and there's less resources for the police and so forth.
As far as the film Taken is concerned, I have to say it was a real eye-opener for me, thinking this possibly can't happen in the UK or where it was set abroad. I don't want to give the punchline away too much. I found it an incredible film, a very harrowing film. So I don't think he did actually glamorise it at all, apart from what you're saying, that Liam does what Liam does best in sorting it out. I will say, however, that Taken 2 is not worth watching because it's complete rubbish.
Right.
As someone eloquently called it, Taken 2 the cleaners. As we come to the end of this podcast, and first of all, thank you for sharing so eloquently and just pointing out certain areas that maybe a lot of people haven't thought of before. With your Chair of Trustees hat on, please, what are the conclusions that you've come up with so far, and what are going to be the recommendations that your organisations can do and also that we can do as well, please?
I think the main thing that we're taking forward at the moment, and this is First Light South Asia really, and to Women Without Roofs. Women Without Roofs doesn't specialise in trafficking victims. It helps any woman. But the main thing is to listen to I'd hesitate to call them victims, but victims and survivors. Listen to their stories and understand what they want and how it can best help them. And then empower them to help others like them. Women Without Roofs in particular, all of our staff are Nepali. They're in Nepal. We don't have any Westerners there going in with their big ideas. It's Nepali staff led. And then we're working with the women and trying to listen to them. Obviously, there's some things that they come up with that we can't do because of Charity Commission rules in the UK. So we have to balance those different needs. But it's definitely about listening to the survivors themselves, taking on their ideas and empowering them. And doing that, it's sort of healing as they're listened to and we respond to them. It's part of the process of restoring their dignity, is listening to them and putting their ideas into practice. There was a second part to that question. What can people do?
Yeah, recommendations, yeah.
Yeah, so First Light South Asia is just getting going. So we are looking for people to donate to us and to pray for us. This research that I've mentioned is available. It's academic research. It's done for universities. I've really only done a very basic summary of what's going on. There's data and there's figures and all sorts. So I know we're happy to talk about more of that, but we do need funds. And that's just getting going. Women Without Roofs, we also can do with a bit of money, but we've been going for 20 years, so we're much more established. If people want to know more, then they can sign up for our newsletter. Our website is being rebranded at the moment for Women Without Roofs, so it may be best just to get in contact with me and I can add you to the newsletter, which comes out every so often. And then prayer, really. I think I mentioned it earlier. I do think there is a call on men to take the Christian idea of marriage to Asia and to not only share the gospel, but share the dignity of women and share about what God has intended for marriage. I feel that is the call at the moment. And as we're seeing that in the West too, with the whole manosphere thing and men, there's something that I think God is doing through men at the moment. So yeah, pray into that. If you're a woman, pray for men to step into that. And if you're a man, think about what influence you can have.
To summarise the past hour, what would you like to say to summarise it all, please, Anna?
It's to do with the beauty of people, really. This is what it always comes back to for me, that we have such an incredible God who has made such incredible and beautiful people. And every time that they are abused, misused, that's abusing God's image, really. And so this is all just part of our calling to love one another. And when we do it, it's just beautiful. When I see my colleagues praying for women, helping them and connecting with them and fellowshipping with them and enjoying their company, it's just stunning. It's so, so beautiful and so exciting. I truly believe that what God calls us to, and if you're feeling that calling, if you're stirred at this moment, just step into it. It's always exciting with God. It's always good.
Wow. For those that want to contact you then, you've mentioned that Women Without Roofs Nepal, the website has been upgraded.
Yep.
I think would be the correct thing to say at this precise moment in time. But if people want to contact you in light of what you've shared, maybe they've been challenged, maybe they want to pray for you, whatever, how can they contact you, please, Anna?
Yeah, so the Women Without Roofs email address, Anna, ANNA, at wwr-nepal.org is my email address. Or you can find us on Facebook. Women Without Roofs is on Facebook.
And the other one?
We're not even sure we're going to have websites. We need to have something, but we're not sure about it yet. It's going to be more word of mouth because we need to protect the identity of these women that we're working with. So,
and I will put it on the show notes, or blurb as I like to call it. Your email address again, should they want to get hold of you, please.
Yeah, Anna at wwr-nepal.org.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for what you've shared over the past hour, Anna. Hopefully it's encouraged people to realise that, we live in a very, very safe environment here in the West. As a Christian, we can go and do what we want to do, basically. But over there, pointing south, go a few thousand miles, it's a different case altogether. And hopefully people are now going to feel encouraged to actually pray that things can change for the better. And that we will take in consideration as well the culture, because if we learn anything from history in the past, we've gone in there with our hobnail boots on thinking we know how to sort this out. And of course we don't. So yeah, it needs to be done properly. But as you say, with your own WWR-Nepal hat on, you employ local people because they know what's best.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully in 20 years' time, we can do another podcast and say how it's been eradicated.
Yes, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. How old would I be? Yeah, let's move on from that subject. Thank you. Anna, thank you so much for sharing everything today. It's been phenomenal. Thank you so much. Cheers. God bless.
Thank you.
Next time on Off-Grid Christianity. So for those that are listening at this very moment in time, holding on by their fingernails, maybe because they just can't comprehend the idea of a loving God, whether it be for what they're going through personally or, for instance, that there's so much trouble in the world, how can God be God?
Yeah.
Whatever hurt they're feeling and the struggle they're going through, a very simple sentence from you, good sir. What would you like to say to them?
I would say Jesus is closer than you think when you are hurting most. Maybe don't look for the joyful Jesus of the choruses, but look for the Jesus who suffers on the cross and understands pain and understands betrayal and disappointment and being let down by the community that he formed. And I would hope and pray that you would find at least one Christian person who would just come right alongside you and enter into that struggle with you and not try to explain it away or sanctify it somehow, but just be there and walk with you.
So please join me with our special guest, Andrew Greystone. He is a lecturer, theologian, and the author of Bleeding for Jesus. This book was the basis for a 2-part Channel 4 BAFTA-winning documentary, See No Evil, about the prolific abuser John Smythe, the fallout of which included the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury. It is a podcast that goes beyond this horror story and is not to be missed. Until then, cheerio.